Hi there, and welcome to today's art class for adult beginners. And this class is all about painting plums in a bowl. So this is a really popular little subject. I've done this one a couple of times, and people really enjoy it because there's lots of circles and there's lots of ellipses, and the colours are really cool. So we're going to be doing that one today. And class will start off with a little intro part where we work with charcoal and we do the image in charcoal, just in black and white. That's an opportunity to rehearse the image, study the shapes, look at the tones, and just have a little practice run. And then we'll switch over to pastels and we'll start doing it in pastel. So classes usually go for a couple of hours. So settle in and get ready. And if you need a cup of tea, grab that now. All right, I'm just going to switch my screen over to my table and you will then be able to see what I'm doing on the table rather than looking at everybody's faces. So just bear with me for 1 minute. I've got to press a couple of buttons and do the swipey thing. And usually it works. So here we go. Yep, there we go. Lovely. So what you're looking at now is the camera looking down on my table. So this will be your view for the rest of the class. And for this class, I'll be working flat on my paper. And normally we work on an easel or have something on a bit of an angle to allow the dust to drop down. But for the purposes of being able to see it on the screen, I'm going to be working flat. So bear with me while we do that. All right, so as I mentioned, the first part of the class is a charcoal sketch, and this is my art diary. So what you'll need is either some drawing paper. I'm just trying to get the focus sorted out there so that it doesn't keep moving for you. Yeah, so you'll need some drawing paper or cartridge paper or an art diary that has a nice white blank page to play with. All right. And you'll need your notes nearby. So as I mentioned, if you've downloaded this video, then you should have received these notes as well, and you could print them off or have a look at those on another screen. I also have my iPad next to me with this image on it. So it's really handy to have your reference photo on another screen, whether that's a phone or an iPad or a computer screen, because you can zoom in and you can really study the image and get a really good insight into what it looks like. Okay, so what we're going to do first up is draw this up on our page. And if you put your reference photo nearby, I like to prop it up in front of me so I can kind of just glance at it easily and it's not going to force me to move my head too much. So if you can just prop it up in front of you somewhere or lie it flat next to you so you can just easily glance at it and keep checking it. Lovely. Next thing you're going to need are your charcoal sticks. So this is a little set of charcoal, willow charcoal. It's a Montmartre brand, so that's a nice little cheapy brand. That didn't cost very much, about $7, I think. And that's what I like to use for these little sketches. It's a nice light charcoal. It's easy to push around and it's not too heavy and dark. So you can get a nice range of tones with this one. I like to use a thin stick like this one. And then I like to use a sort of a fat, chunky stick as well, just to do some shading and things with. It's nice to have a little bit of option there with the sizes and the shapes of your charcoal sticks. And pastel sticks are a similar shape and texture, I guess. So they're the two sizes I like to use. Willow charcoal is a natural charcoal, so you can see it looks like a little branch. So it hasn't been compressed or anything, so it's lovely and soft. All right. So they're my two sticks I'm going to use. For the first part of the class, we're just going to do what is called a thumbnail sketch. So artists often do little thumbnail sketches to kind of get an idea of composition, if they're doing a landscape or a still life or something like that. Just helps you kind of get familiar with what you're about to paint. So if you want to draw up a shape on your page in about the same proportion as the image that we're doing today, so the image of the plums is a landscape shape, so it's wider across the top and narrower on the sides. So I just like to draw up something about that size that doesn't quite fill my page, because then I've got room over here to make notes or do my little colour swatches or whatever later on. If you want to fill up your whole page, then that's absolutely fine. If you want to do even smaller ones, little thumbnails, then that's fine too. So do whatever works for you. I find this works really nicely for me. You see, I've just done that freehand. For this part of the class, I like to start off fairly loosely and not get too caught up in dimensions and sizes and things. So I do things by eye. If you struggle with that, then by all means measure it all up and get your lines in the right place. And then you can see on your reference photo, I've got a little grid line. So I've got a line down the center and a line across the middle like that. So the picture is actually divided into 4 parts. And the reason I do that is to make it easier to draw it in the first place. I find if I break my image down into portions or sections, it's a lot easier to draw than trying to draw the whole thing. So that's just a little technique that I've learned on how to draw things. And if you have a more detailed image, then you can possibly put more grid lines on there and break it up into even smaller sections. Up to you. But we'll start off with 4 parts today. So when you look at your image, if we just look at this top left-hand quarter, I always start in that quarter for some reason, probably because I'm left-handed, I think. Anyway, so I'm going to start in that top left-hand corner. So if you look at your picture, put a little mark on your grid line in about the spot where the dish hits that line. So where they intersect pretty much. Just want to draw a little mark there and then come around and look at the side of the picture and figure out whereabouts the little bowl or intersects with the line here. It doesn't actually there because there's a plum in front of it. But if you did it by eye, then you'd say it intersects about there. Okay. And then what we want to do is basically join the dots. And because this is a round bowl, not very good at doing round things without tracing them, draw your line like that. So that's basically the edge of the bowl. Now, if you want to, you can move and put all the edges in. We might do that first if that's okay. And then we'll come back and we'll put the shapes of the plums in. So coming down to this one, follow the edge of that and then look at where the bowl intersects with your halfway mark at the bottom of your picture. And it's pretty much on the very edge, isn't it? Because this little plum at the bottom there and almost the plate nearly bleed off that picture. So it's almost off the edge. And again, just join those dots and get the lovely round edge in there. Now, if you want to cheat, you can always go and get a bowl or a plate and trace it when we do the colour version, just to get it nice and round and get your circle right. Circles are tricky to do freehand. Okay, so we've done that bit. Over into the right-hand side. So if you look at where the bowl intersects with your halfway mark on there, it's around about 1/3 of the way in, I would say. So if I break that into 3, it's around about there. Put a little mark there and do the same thing. So just join the dots pretty much to get your bowl in there. And as I said, if it's not quite round, when we do the colour version, you can go and get a plate and cheat. That's what I normally do. Yeah. All right, lovely. So we've got our little bowl drawn in. So that's the main shape. That's the part that's sitting underneath all the plums. Next thing, we need to use the grid lines to figure out where all the plums are sitting. So if we start back up here in this top left-hand quarter, just have a look at that plum in the middle and do the same thing. So figure out where that intersects with your halfway line. And it's just slightly below the halfway mark, so about there. And where it intersects on this middle line would be around about that far in. So I'd say it would be, let me just have a look, probably about a quarter of the way across in this section here. So that's that bit. So you can basically join those lines together. It's not a very good line, like that. Same thing down in here. So what we're doing is just figuring out where this intersects in relation to those grid lines, because they're really important. They give us a lot of information and help to get your drawing right. Now notice none of these plums are perfectly round, so you don't have to have perfect circles. Notice the shapes that they're slightly not quite round. Okay, so joining the dots there, and then coming across and figuring out where this little plum sits in relation to that red line again. And I'd say it's about halfway between your middle line and the edge of your plate. It's about there. And then again, join those dots and then come up and join the other two. So now you should have a fairly wonky sort of circular shape in the middle there. It is a little bit elongated. So just make sure you make that a little bit longer on the left and the right sides. So that's plum number 1. Okay, now we're going to come across and stay up in this top left quarter for a second. And let's put this other little plum in there. So I can see that that intersects the line here. It doesn't quite touch this middle plum that we've just drawn. So keep a little bit of space between the two. And then it comes up about halfway. So halfway across there, I would say. And it comes across the edge of the bowl. So it kind of bulges out over the side of the bowl and then down through there. Notice too that they're all different sizes. So some are much larger than the others. So, and you'll notice that when you start to draw them in, you think, oh, they should all be, the same size, but they're actually not, because they're on different angles. And some of them we can see the tops, others we can see the sides, etc. So they're not all the same size. Okay, so that's that little guy. He's in there. And then we've got this other one sitting up in this section as well. And it's lower down inside the bowl. So we can see the edge of the bowl behind that one. And it comes around and it sort of meets this other one that we just did before. And it sits down behind the first one. So drawing that one in kind of does that. And it's also not entirely circular. Okay, so that's that little guy. So that's the top left-hand quarter pretty much done with the basic shapes. And that's what we're looking at this point, just the basic shapes in each section. So if we move down into this bottom left-hand quarter, it's really dark in here in the middle, which is what I like about it. It's kind of got all this lovely darkness. And then as it come out to the edges of the bowl, it gets lighter. But if you can find the edge of that little plum that's sitting down underneath on the left-hand side here, just draw the shape of that, and it sort of sits inside this quarter. It's not touching any of those halfway grid marks at all. So it sits about there, and it's inside the bowl, so we can still see the edge of the bowl behind that one. So it sits around about there. Lovely. And then we'll come across and you can see that big one at the bottom. So it's bulging out of the bowl, isn't it? And it's bleeding off the side of the page. So it literally jumps out of the picture. So it's quite large compared to these other ones that we've just put in. So if we look at the edge of that inside this bottom left-hand corner, and it's not quite touching this guy. So you can see the red of that one isn't quite touching. And it comes up to here on the halfway line. That's where it starts to jump out of the plate a little bit. I'm going to make it a bit rounder there. So that's the shape of that one. And then we bring it around and just looking at where that sits again in relation to your bottom quarter. There we go, like that. Lovely. So that's that big one that comes off the edge there. Then as we move across into this right-hand quarter, we've got this little plum that sits here. It's inside the bowl and comes up. Oh, I just snuck up into that top right quarter, sorry. A little hard not to, isn't it, when you're doing these continuous shapes? And then that comes around. It's quite big too, this guy. And it sits down behind this big one that we've just put in here. So that little shape comes around. It comes up into that top right quarter, across here, just touches the edge of the plate.
Jenny, I've got a question.
Yes.
You're drawing the plums completely round. On the picture, they're not completely round because they're in shadow, parts of the shadow.
Yes.
But at the moment you're drawing them circular. Obviously,
Okay.
further down the track, they're going to become partially in shadow.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't draw them half-assed shaped now. You'd do it later.
Yeah, I would, because we're just going to shade in all those dark areas, and then they'll still then they'll change shape. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. When I was looking at initially, I thought, oh, I've got to draw those not circular. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not according to colour, it's the shape we're doing at the moment.
Correct. Yes.
Gotcha.
And then we're going to look at tones. So we're just getting the line marks in now and the outlines. Yep. And then we'll look at the tone and we'll start to shade them. And that'll change.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. It's almost like a flower, isn't it? This shape of the plums. We've got the big one in the middle, and then we've got all these others sort of scattered around the outside. And I quite like how that's working. There is a little one hiding down in there, just underneath that one we've just finished. I don't know if you can see that bit of red in there. So if you could put a little indicator to tell yourself that that's there. And then coming up into this right-hand quarter, we'll just take that one up, and it comes out of the plate again. So that's sort of oozing out of the plate and then back down inside it. So we've got a couple that sort of sit outside the edge of the bowl or the plate, and a couple, well, most of them will sit inside it. So they all have different shapes, and they're all different sizes. And as we just talked about, when we shaded everything, that's going to change the shapes, because we'll be looking at tones, the different levels of grey and the blacks and the whites and so forth. So once you've got your main drawing in like this, then you can start to look at all of those other things and focus on getting that happening, all the different tones. Okay, so we're just really looking at the outline of everything at the moment, just to get everything in the right spot, and then we can have a bit of a play. All right, so that's the basic start of this picture. Now, I've been looking at my colour version on my notes while I'm doing that, so that's this version here. That's the thing I've been referring to. So just to measure, the distance from your centre line over to the plum, the height, etc., just to kind of figure all that out, where everything sits in relation to my grid line. And as I said, this was all done freehand, so it might not be perfectly exact, and that's fine, because we just want to kind of loosen up and get into art mode at this point, but also, really focus on the lights and the darks and so forth at this stage too. So once we've got our little drawing done like that, then flip over to your other side so you can see your black and white version. And that kind of changes everything, doesn't it? Because now we can see the various ranges of grey in there. So you can see underneath all those plums is really black, and the inside of the bowl is quite dark. And then the outside rim of the bowl, we've got light catching that, and there's a little dark outline around it, which is part of the colour of the bowl. So what I'm going to do now is, referring to my little black and white picture, start to blend or smudge in some of the tone, because now we're going to kind of fuzz off all the edges a little bit and start to change those shapes. So I've got my short fat stick of charcoal now, and I'm just using it sort of on its side. I just want a wider kind of coverage area, and start to just darken off in between all the plums. And then as you come out towards the edge of your bowl or your plate, you want to lift up a little bit and lighten, so that you're not putting too much charcoal down right at the edge there, because we want to try and keep some of that white, because that's where the light is. So working on white paper like this, we're going to use the white paper as the light. So we don't have any white charcoal or anything at this point. We're just kind of leaving the light undone. So as you're coming out from the middle, just very lightly blend some of that charcoal. And if you do put too much down, like I've just done, grab your kneadable eraser. That's the eraser that you can knead like dough, and find a little clean edge, and you can just literally take some of that off to lighten it up. So your kneadable eraser is your best friend. You want to lighten stuff up. So we're going to run around the picture and study all the dark sections. So as you come around into this bottom area here. See this little plum? He's got a lovely light section there, but the darkness kind of runs across in that shape, doesn't it? And so we can actually darken off all of that. So I'm just going to cover all that with nice dark tones. And then down in between those two plums is quite dark as well. And we're starting to shade this now. I'm just going to close the window because someone's whippersnipping somewhere. Hopefully that'll help a little bit. So can you see how I've darkened through in here? Because I can see there's a shape there that's quite dark. And then down through here, so this is where it starts to get quite delicate when you're looking at your tones, looking at the plum itself and darkening off through there, because what's happening is it's turning away from the light, okay? So the light in this particular picture seems to be coming from above or maybe slightly to the right, actually, yeah, because, why do I say that? On the right-hand side of the bowl, see over here, it's not as light on the inside there as it is on this side. So you can see that it's much lighter on the top left and down on the left side, and a little bit here too. So that's telling me that the light must be coming from top right. So the light source is coming from that direction. So it's not catching on the inside of the bowl in here, but it is catching on the inside on the left-hand side and around the bottom there. And that will also then indicate where all the light sits in relation to the plums themselves and why they've got these little light sections in different spots. So as I said before, we've got this shading in here. So what we're doing now is we're really looking at the different tones and shades of grey, all right, as we work with these shapes. And this is what makes things look real and solid and gives everything perspective and shape. Okay, so what I've done is I've darkened off around that little plum there, and most of this plum is a mid-grey colour. I'm getting funny little marks in here. It must be the paper or the charcoal or something. Most of that plum is a mid-grey, and then where it's darkest, so this is where you really want to notice your tones. Where it's darkest, I can colour like that with my charcoal. And when we do this in colour, it's even more fun because we get to use a few different tones of reds or purples to create these beautiful shaded areas. So see how that's now starting to feel like it's round, like a solid object. And then it's darker here. So each plum is casting a shadow onto the ones around it too. So that's another thing that you need to kind of think about. And then if I want to give this one the light, so I can pop the light back in because I've filled it all up now, I can get my kneadable eraser and just literally dab that on there and get a little bit of a shine happening on there. In those two spots, it's got two little spots where it's got a shine. And so the whiter I can get that, the lighter it's going to look. And then I can just gently sort of push my greys around a little bit. If you stick your fingers in there, you'll find that it'll lighten it off quite nicely, but you can get a lovely blend going on. Okay, so that's that. And I can come back and tidy that up afterwards, but we just really want to focus on the darks and where they are at the moment and how that's all kind of working in with the plate and the shapes. So that's that little one. And then what if we move up to the left now? So we'll have a look at this next one up here on the left. Now, I'm going to take out the edge of the bowl on this guy because we can't see it under the plum. I might also remove my grid mark in there with my kneadable eraser. So we've got an interesting little shape in this one. It's got like a V shape. They've all got these little V shapes where the centered bit is. So it's like that. And it's quite dark in there. And then around that is lighter. And then again, we've got different tones. So if you look at this little plum, it's darker around the right-hand side, our right. So round in there. So see how all these edges of the plums, as they merge into the center of the bowl, they merge into this really dark area and we can't see the edges. They kind of disappear. So that's lovely, isn't it? It's sort of lost edges, that's called. And the edges are not a hard, sharp line, and you can't quite see where one thing starts and the other thing finishes. But it's kind of cool. Okay, so I'm just shading this one in a mid-grey and darkening off where it's darkest. So darkest under on the left bottom side, and then coming around through the edge there. And then it's a little lighter on the side, and then we've got this interesting little shape around that V section. It's like a little loop like that. I've made it too dark there, but I just wanted to put that in so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, and then again, I can use my little kneadable eraser to take some of that out and put the lights back in. And if you want to draw a line with your kneadable eraser, you can. You can just shape it into a little knife edge piece like that. And then it's a little lighter down through there. We've got light over here. So again, I can take some of that out and brighten that up. Got a little dot of light just there. And another bit of light through here. And then you can come back in with your charcoal and fiddle around with your tones again to change the tones of the lights and the darks. This is really important in your art. If you want to make art that is eye-catching and has drama, you really need to get good at seeing the tones and then interpreting those into colour. Okay, so that will do for that little guy. We'll fill in a bit of that light there, it's a bit too much. And then right in the middle, where the little stem usually sits, it's quite dark in there, isn't it? So you can darken that right off, and that'll send it back off into the inside of the plum. So you can fiddle around a little bit with your eraser, you know, taking stuff out and putting it back in. It's also nice to use for blending if you want to do that. You can get some lovely effects with the eraser. Okay, so we're going to keep moving around because I want to get stuck into the colour version fairly soon. So as you move around on the right-hand side of this little guy, see how it's dark down in there, and then as you come up to the edge of the plate or the dish, it gets lighter. So I've got this beautiful bit of light that shines around the edge of the plate there. And we'll highlight that later on in colour as well. And so this little plum, this next one, it's sitting up here. Notice where the light and the dark is on that guy. So it's quite dark over here on the left hand and top side. And it's much darker there because it's up against the light of the dish. So thinking about that too, you know, when something looks really dark, it's usually because there's something light next to it, and vice versa. So whenever you want to try and make something brighter or darker, put the opposite next to it, and that will make it all pop. So down in between this guy and the middle plum is quite dark again. So we've got quite a lot of shadow happening in there. Okay, and then we've got, it's mostly all grey, so I'm just going to grey most of that off, and then I can use my eraser to get my white back in, but I also want to darken off in here because again we've got that little V shape in the where the middle of the plum is. So it's got a little V in there, and then it kind of has a little bit of a lighter tone around here, sort of a lighter colour, and again a little bit of a darker tone. So remember your lights and your darks together. So we're just sort of playing around with the tones at the moment. And then we've got shine on here. So lovely little shine just on the right side of that grid mark. It's not quite white enough for me, but that's basically the tones that we want to incorporate into that one. And if you look closely at the colour version, I know you have to flip your paper over, there's actually a lot of blue in the plums because the blue is being reflected off the bowl or the plate. So that'll be something to consider as we get into the colour version. So I'm just moving around this guy and darkening off again in between these two plums, and remembering also that it gets lighter on the edge of the bowl as it comes up to the side there. So when we do it in colour, it's going to be delicious. Yum, yum. I love these colours. It's one of the things that I really like about this picture is the colours, and it looks really nice on a dark paper. All right, so I've darkened off around there, and we're going to come in and do this little plum now. So its shape, see that funny, that interesting little shape sort of comes around here like that, and then we've got that little triangle V bit in there. I think I went too far over. So that's the shape in that. See that they've all got this little seam kind of thing down the side of them. I missed that bit, but we can focus more on that after. But it's like a little seam where it's joined up through there. Okay, so this is a lovely big one, and it's quite dark in colour, this guy. So it's got a lot of grey on there as well. So we just put grey everywhere. And once you've got your mid grey down there, then you can kind of put your darker tones in there. So darker around here, around that little middle bit. And then darker in towards the middle where they all join up underneath that centre one. And then we've got a lovely shine on this one. There's two shines on there. We've got a nice big fat one on the right hand side, and then we've got a nice little sweepy one, little arch shaped one on the left, bottom left there. Okay, so I've got those tones in there. I'm just going to gently push that around with my fingers and soften it off a little bit. And it's quite dark in the centre there. And then I can again use my kneadable eraser and just take some of that off to put the shine into the plums. And you could probably darken up a little bit more in there too. Down through there. Lovely, lovely. And then moving around. So remember, we've got this little one hidden down in here. So what we can't really see a lot of that one. It's just a little bit of a lighter tone, and on the left hand side it kind of it's dark because it's hiding under this middle one in the center. Then there's a little smudge of slightly bright red in the picture, but in the black and white it's a mid-tone, so it's not white, but it's a light gray. So I'm just going to lighten that off a little bit just to indicate that there is a little plum down inside there. And then behind that, in the bowl, it's dark again. So we're going to go nice and dark through there. Again, we've got those lost edges. So the edge of the plum we've just completed is sort of disappearing off into the dark there. And this side of the bowl isn't catching as much light as the other side. So it's got a little bit more grey as we come up to the edge. It's a very wonky looking bowl I've got there. Okay. And then we've got a little bit of a line through here. All right, so just make sure you make that nice and black in there so that that tiny portion of a plum underneath is able to be seen, even though it's a tiny little bit. That's telling us that, you know, there's more underneath that we can't quite see. Okay, and then we'll move around to this one. So as we come into this one, we'll darken off from the center area where it's coming out. Fill the whole thing in first with some grey, and then we can darken off all the way around that and in underneath that one. So it's quite dark through there. And then as you come up into the mid greys, that's when we start to see some of the shine again. So when you're doing a bowl of fruit or petals on a flower or that kind of thing, you'll find that everything is the same kind of colour or tone. And so you've got to find ways to help each one stand apart, I suppose. And that's, again, looking at tones. So when you look at all these plums, they're all the same sort of colour. But the places where you put your darks and your lights are what's going to make the edges of those stand apart from each other and not kind of merge in and have, you know, like no definition. So for instance, this one here that we've just done is really dark in the middle there, isn't it? Because it's sitting underneath that plum, and it's also casting a shadow onto the left-hand side of the plum, this plum, because the light's coming from up here, top right. And so how do I make this one look like it's behind this one? And if you look at your tones, you can see that this little one on the bottom here, on the bottom right, is lighter than this guy. So when we put that one in and look at the tone of that one, you make sure that that grey is a little bit lighter than the dark of this one. And to do that, you either have to make this much darker or lighten up that section there, but not too much, because it's not super light, because it's got more light grey in it as we fill this one up. So it's just a lot to think about, really, and consider. It's really just looking at your tones, and that's what makes your paintings pop. I was up in Toowoomba the other day and went to the Grammar Art Festival, which was amazing, and with a friend who's not really into art, but she was just looking at everything, and all the things she loved the best had massive contrast, so super, super dark and super, super light, and she just loved the drama of that. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It's what I love too. I really like paintings or art that pops, you know, it's got drama and lots of light and lots of dark in it. So looking at things like that, figuring out, how do I make this one come forward of that one? How can I lighten that up? Or, you know, what do I need? What is it that makes that sit forward or on top of something else? And it'll be to do with tone for sure. So always check your tone, always, always. So this little section here, I've made it too light, but I just wanted to show you what I meant. This area here that I'm just rubbing some out, if I lighten that up, it's going to put it in front of that one. So then I'll know that, you know, they're kind of layered. It needs to be slightly darker, but it still needs to be lighter than what's behind it. So it's just figuring out all that stuff. And then I'm going to pop a bit of light. I better put some light on that other one too. I forgot about him. So he's got two blobs of light. And this one here has two as well, but they're a slightly different shape. So one is longer. And then we've got a little dot there. Now they could be lighter. They do need to be lighter. But I want to move on so that we can get onto the colour. And we've got the little dip in there. So that section on this little plum is quite dark. And then you can hardly see any of the detail in there, but kind of bleeds off the very edge of your page. Okay. And again, checking the tones on this one. So it's got lost edges on the left-hand side because it's dark, and it kind of disappears into the bottom of the bowl and merges into this one on the left-hand side that we started with. And then we've just got to do this middle guy, and then we can get onto the colour version. So looking at this one, and if you have a look at where your grid line sits on here, it's the centre of this plum is about there. So it's just off centre in our image. And I'm going to darken that off, make it nice and dark in there. And we've got that little crease through there. And again, just noticing your tones. So against the background, or against all the other plums that are underneath this round one, except for that bottom left section of it, you can see the edges of this plum. So that means that the tone of this plum is lighter than what's behind it. That makes sense? So it looks like it's coming forward, so you can see it sitting in front of or on top of these other ones. So I'm just shading around on there to put the tones in that I can see. So it's darker around the outside, but it's not as dark as the background behind it. So it gets a little bit, you know, confusing sometimes when you're trying to figure out, you know, what's light, what's dark. But having a black and white version of your reference photo is always a great idea, because you can kind of figure it out by looking at it in black and white. It really does help to see all your different tones. I'm just mucking around with this one a little bit and getting the tones in there. And as I said, I made the center section quite dark, but it's got that little stalk in the middle. So I'm going to pop a bit of light in there with my eraser to get that to kind of come forward. So this is just a very loose example. You could spend many hours working in charcoal. It's a lovely, lovely medium. So, you know, if doing this excites and delights you, it's really a nice thing to pursue. You can do some awesome stuff just with charcoal. All right. So I'm going to leave this part of the class right there, or you could put your little dark rim around your bowl if you want to. And we're not going to worry about the background today. If you want to darken that off, you can. In the picture, it's like a mid-tone timber tabletop, I guess. And if you feel like putting that in, by all means, go for it. But you could do it after class if you like. But for this class, we're not going to worry about putting the background in. We just really want to focus on those plums and the bowl and the shapes. And looking at my shapes now, they're all a little bit wonky, but you know, that's what makes it art, doesn't it? Cool. So we've had one rehearsal of the structure of this image. And so now when we go on to do the second part, the colored part, you should have a reasonably better idea of where everything sits. And we've rehearsed it. And if you've made a mistake or done something wrong and at this point, then recognizing that is a great thing because you can rectify it in the next part. Cool. All right. So let's move on to that section now. So we're going to refer back to the color version. And I've got this now. I'm going to prop that up in front of me so I can see it easily. And as I said before, I've also got it on my iPad so I can zoom in and I can see more detail. You will probably need a light colored pastel pencil or a white charcoal pencil if you're working on dark paper today. I like working on the dark because I think this blue of the bowl really pops on a dark paper. But if you don't have a dark paper, then use whatever you have. That's absolutely fine. If it's a light paper, then charcoal might be a good option for drawing in your grid lines and so forth. We might talk about colours first. So I'm going to just run through the colours that I've picked out to do this with. So what I've got here in my little palette is a range of reds and purples for the plums, and then a range of the bluey aqua kinds of colours for the bowl. I think I forgot to pick up a blue violet, but anyway, as you know by now, if you've done classes with me before, blue violet's one of my favourites for my darks. So I'm just going to put some colour swatches on my page, and while I'm doing that, if you want to choose your pastels to be close to or similar to these, that'd be great. I've tried to put them in order from dark to light. So when you are choosing colours, just try to make sure that you have a nice range of lights to darks, because as we've been talking, tone's really important. But dark doesn't always have to be black. So in this instance, I've got my dark purple, and I might have to pick up a blue violet as well, which is slightly darker than this, but it's still a purple tone. So that's really lovely for a dark. Okay, so I'm going to use that in my shadows. Then I've got this other plummy kind of grey, warm grey, mauvey colour, which is quite nice too. Now, if you don't have all of these colours, that's absolutely fine. Just try to have enough tone. Okay. Then I picked up a purple as well. Now, I may not use all of these, but when I was hovering over my pastels with the picture, I saw a fair bit of purple in there, and purple's always beautiful for shadows. So I grabbed that. I also grabbed this delicious colour. Now, a lot of you may not have something like this because if you've just got the basic art spectrum set, you might not have this beautiful magenta. So a red or something of the same tone will be fine. Some sort of red, purpley red colour. Then I've got this gorgeous bright red. So these reds I bought in Paris in, where were we? Can't think of the name of the shop now. Something de pastel. Beautiful, beautiful. La Maison. Anyway, yeah, I bought this beautiful set of reds, and I don't use them very often because they're too precious, but I thought today I'm going to rip some of those out. So a couple of reds. You want a dark red and a lighter red. And then I've got a pink as well. Might not use that, but I thought, oh, I'll just get a pink and see. So they're kind of my dark to mid colours, okay? And I might get a blue violet to go darker, maybe. Or even a navy blue would be great if you don't have a blue violet. Something not quite black. I think black might be a bit much, although wouldn't hurt if you want a bit more drama. So yeah, we probably need one more dark. Anyway, I'll move on to the blues. So these are the blues I was looking at for the bowl and also for some of the reflection in the plums. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of blue in the plums because of the colour of the bowl. So everything reflects off everything else. So I've got a couple there. Now these two are pretty similar in colour. This one is slightly darker. So what I was looking for is sort of a range of this colour, lighter and darker, so that I can get that nice shading in the bowl, inside of the bowl there. So if you have a couple of those, that would be helpful. If not, you can always use white to lighten up your colours. This is another little blue. It's like a sky blue. And again, I can see a fair bit of that in the plums. So I thought I'd pick that one up. And then around the edge of my bowl, I want to put this very light blue. It's almost white, so light, like a grey almost. So that'll be nice around the edges. And then I've got white. I hope that's white. They get so dirty, it's hard to tell. Yeah, I think that's pretty white. And that's going to do for the shine on my plums and a few of the highlights on the bowl. So that's my palette. They're the colours that I've decided to use. I might just go grab an extra dark, probably a blue violet. Maybe I've picked up black. I'm not sure now. What's that? Yeah, that's black. Oh, well, we'll hang on to black. See, maybe we'll use that too. Can't quite find a blue violet, even though it's my favourite colour. It seems to be the one I can never find. Let me have another look. And if I do find it, it's usually in tiny little crumbs because it's very crummy. It's very dusty. Yeah, that's it. That's nice. Okay, so I've just put that next to black. So can you see the difference there? The black has almost a greeny kind of tinge, but the blue violet has this purpley undertone. So they're very similar in tone. So either of those would be fine. If you don't have blue violet, then a black would be fine. Just for those really dramatic darks. Alrighty, so that's the colour palette. And once you've got that organised, then we need to rule up your page. So I've picked out this coloured paper today. So it's aubergine, I think. And I thought that'd be quite nice with the blue bowl and the red plums. So that was my choice. Excuse me. All right, so what you need today is a board to tape your paper down onto. Where did I put that? Bear with me while I track down my little board. I've put it away somewhere. Not sure where. Anyway, normally I will tape my paper down onto a little bit of MDF or backing board. It just means that it stays still and I don't have to hold on to it. Okay, so I've just tracked down my board. You can see it's well used. It's got tape all over the place. Okay, so if you can reuse your tape, that's always a good thing to do. We've talked about this before, but when you tape your paper onto your board, you want to make sure that you get some of the sticky off. So I usually, stick some of it onto my tablecloth or my jeans or whatever I'm wearing, just to get some of the adhesive off, because it can tear. So if you leave it on for too long, it can get a bit too sticky and it can tear your paper. But if it's a second-hand piece that you might have used before, that's even better because it's less likely to tear. So I get a bit lazy, and I do tend to leave some of the tape on my boards sometimes after I've taken the painting off. And so that comes in quite handy, because now I can just reuse this and tack it down lightly so it won't move around too much. And that's plenty now. Yep, that's not going to move at all. So it's quite good for that. So I've just popped a bit more light on there. Hopefully that's easier to see. And it's got a bit of shadow on there too. All right, let's see what's going to happen with my light. That might be better. See how we go. If it's too bright or too glary, just let me know and I'll adjust the lighting. Got a couple of settings here. Okay, so this is my paper. It's taped down. Doesn't look very pretty, but it's taped down onto a board, so I don't have to hold on to it to draw anything. I've got a little white charcoal pencil here, which I tried to sharpen yesterday, and then all the bits came off in the sharpener, so I've got to go and dig them out later. So it's not sharp at all. It's all messy. But I'm just going to use that to put my grid mark on. So find your halfway lines. We will use a ruler this time, just so we get everything in the right place. So this paper is Colourfix Art Spectra. It's got a lovely gritty texture to it. And no, it's not working very well at all. And so it's 23 by 30 centimetres. So half of 30 is 15 and half of 23 is 11 and a half. So just find your halfway marks and rule up your page. If you're not filling the background in, just press fairly lightly so that it's easy to get that mark off later on. You don't want something that's not going to come off, and that can happen with pastels. Especially on this paper, it kind of stains almost. So it's good if you just press lightly if you're going to remove your lines later on, and they hopefully won't stick too much. I'm going to find another pencil though. That one's not sharp enough. So I've got a couple of pastel pencils here, so I'll use this one. It's a yellow colour. Doesn't always have to be white. You just need something that's light that you can see on whatever colour paper you're using. Faber-Castell are my favourites. So I've got sets of those, which is lovely. All right, so let's start again. Now, as I said earlier, you can go and cheat and grab a little plate or something that might be circular. That's not going to be big enough. That's my blue tape. But you could, just get a cereal bowl or a little bread and butter plate, or something like that, to get the size of or the shape, I should say, of your bowl right, because it is quite circular on here. So remember before when we were marking in the shape of the bowl, we literally just figured out where the edges of it was sitting in relation to the grid line, how far in from the edge or how far out from the middle, whatever works for you. Some people, look at the negative space, that's the space around something, or they look at the shape of the object. Whatever works for you. I kind of vary between the two depending on what's easier at the time. And then once you've got your marks in on your grid line of where the bowl goes, you just want to literally join them up. Try and get it nice and circular. Not succeeding at all. May have to go and grab a plate. That's what I'm going to do. All right, I've got a couple of options here. So this is a cereal bowl, and it's not quite big enough, but it might do just to help me, to guide me. And this is a bread and butter plate. Just about perfect, I think. There we go, template. There we go. So I'm going to be cheap and just place that on those lines and then trace around it. So if you can find an easy way to make life more pleasant for yourself, by all means go for it. So good, pop all the crockery away now. Lovely. So bowls and plates and things like that come in very handy, so don't be afraid to do that. Once we've got our basic shape in there, wow, I was way off with my circle, then we can, work with that. It is a little bit wide here though. That's okay, I'm just going to run with it. Okay, lovely. Now, once you've got that done, we need to start to kind of just lightly mark in where all these plums are sitting. So don't get too caught up in getting them, precisely in the right shape and everything, because we'll start to shade everything in, and that's when it'll kind of move a fair bit. So again, you just want to find where everything is on your grid line and then draw in the shapes of those. So just do it loosely. As I said, you'll probably lose all your lines. Once we start to get colour in here and blocking everything in, you'll probably lose quite a lot of the information that you're putting down now. So don't get too caught up in doing that detail just yet. Okay, so I'm just drawing in this one on the left. And remember that one doesn't touch the middle one, so there's a little dark gap in between those two, and it comes out over the edge of the plate or the bowl through there. Because my plate's slightly larger than the actual picture, it's going to be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. All right, and then we can work our way around in each quarter. Remember, each quarter is there to help you break your picture down into segments so that it's a bit easier to draw. So just remembering that and looking at where the plum intersects with your lines and then drawing in what you can see. Okay. And the shapes, even if you wanted to put in some of those little sections with where the stem comes from, you could do that too. Put in those basic shapes. Every time you do this, you're committing something to memory, so it makes it easier to remember or recall or do again. It's just like practicing, isn't it? The more you do something, the better you get at it and the more familiar it becomes. Okay, so they're 2 plums pretty much, plus my middle one. And I've just got to put the middle of the middle one in about there. So his little seam comes just above the halfway mark there, and then he sits off centre. Okay, so we're just committing all of this to memory at the moment. I'm going to go back up into the right-hand corner now and just look at where everything intersects there. Okay, so this plum on the top right looks to be a lot bigger than the others. It's much darker too, which is interesting. So it comes around down like that. And again, all the edges kind of vanish in behind that big one in the middle. So they get all lovely and dark down inside there. And so this fella, he hangs over the edge of the plate, and then he's got that beautiful seam that comes around there. I want to put light blue in that when we colour it. Can you see light blue in there? It's beautiful. Purple and light blue. Lovely colours. All right, and then we've got this little hidden plum down in here. So that's just a little splash of red that we can put in after. And then this guy sits inside the dish, comes through all the way to the edge over here, up through there, and then over the halfway line, in underneath the middle plum, and then around through there, like that. So it sits inside the bowl. And then we've got this big one here who, I think this middle one needs to be bigger. Anyway, this big guy here sits in front of this one on the right, And it's actually more off to the right-hand side than this middle, so that makes sense. So it comes around like that. And then we've got the top of that guy here. So it kind of bleeds off the edge of the page, off the edge of the painting, which is nice too. I like when things do that sometimes because they're not sitting bang in the middle of your page. So it's nice to have edges that sort of disappear. And then we've got our final one over here on the left. And so it's got disappearing edges inside the middle area there. It's quite dark, and then we can see the edges of it here. I can't see the top of that one where the stem comes from. So that's hiding on the side. So that's basically the shape of what we need to be drawing in here. Okay. So just checking back with your picture, checking in that you've got all your bits and pieces in the right places. You know, how far across does the middle plum come? It's slightly off center over to the right a little bit more. So we haven't got the crosshairs right in the middle of that guy. It's off to the side a little bit. And so a light line like that is enough at this point. And then we can start to get some color and tone in there. The next thing we need to think about is what order are we going to do this in? And so I always like to start from whatever's behind and then work forward. So if you look at the order of the picture, I'll just pop it here on the screen. Obviously the bowl is underneath all the plums. So we want to be getting that in first. So what we'll do is we'll start to put some of this blue in here and get some of this tone happening. So darker down in underneath the plums and then lighter as we get up around to the edge. And again, noticing where the light sits in relation to the direction of the light. So remember we said there's more light on the left and around here on the bottom than there was on the right. And that's much more apparent in the black and white picture than it is in this one. And that's why it's good to have your black and white version. Once we get the bowl in and we get some dark down underneath here, then we can start to work on the plums. And then it's a matter of figuring out what order are the plums in, basically. I know we've just drawn them in, you know, around clockwise pretty much. But now we need to think about what sits behind where. So you can see this little sliver of plum on the right is obviously underneath everything. So we could pop that in first. And then we can kind of go, okay, so which one would be next? Could be pretty much any of these three. So these three that are sinking down deeper into the dish, they don't sit over the side of it at all, and they're kind of underneath the middle one. They're the three that we would do next. And then we would work forward and do these next guys, and then we'd do the one in the center last, I think. Not necessarily, but that's probably what we'll do. So that's you know, what you need to think about as well when you're figuring out how you're going to tackle this and in which order you're going to start getting colour down onto your page. So I'll pop that back up in front of me again. The first thing we need to do, as I said, is get some blue onto our bowl and some darks down in there in the centre. I like to block in my darks first. I find that kind of helpful. So if you get your blue violet, your darkest one, if it's black, then use black. And we're just going to kind of smudge it around. I've just got a really short stumpy piece. You might have something a little bit longer. But what you want to do is just run it around where you can see all the dark areas. So that's in between the plums. It's quite dark. And this is just the first layer. So we just want to put a light coat of this on. If you have blue violet, you'll know that it's quite a strong colour, so you don't want to have too much down to start with. I like to start off lightly and then kind of work my way into it. If I feel like I need to add more dark, I can later on. But I just like to go gently at first because it is a pretty strong colour. Make sure you bring some of that up into the bowl area, so where it's darkest in the bowl, which is around the edges, and not on the very edge, but under the plums pretty much. And so I've basically just kind of outlined all those areas with a little bit of this dark, and that's probably enough at this point. So we'll definitely come back and put more dark in there as we go. And remember your black and white version, remember where we put all the dark, and that's where you want to be putting it now. Okay, so just a little bit of dark information like that. So this is called blocking in. We're just blocking in the dark areas. Okay, so I'll pop that aside for now, and I'll definitely be picking it up again afterwards. But now we want to start to get some of the blue on here. Once we get some colour down, then we can start to blend it in a little bit. So this is my darker blue. Remember I had two blues. I've got kind of aqua, beautiful aqua colours. If you don't have blues, you might want to have a yellow bowl. You know, it's up to you. You don't have to use the same colour that's in your picture. But that one is lighter and this one's a little bit darker, just in tone. Similar colours. One's a little bit dark. It's hard to see on that in that light actually. Just change that a bit. That's better. There we go. Now you can see. So that's a little bit of a darker blue than this one. Not much, but slightly different. And that's where knowing your tones and understanding those really help you to get the right colours and tones in place. So what I'm doing now is I'm just zhooshing some of this blue around and sort of running it over the top of the dark that I've just put down. I'm leaving the very edge of the plate undone at this point because I want to put my lighter colour there. And so just coming around with my blue and smudging it in with my dark a little bit so that it's starting to get a little bit of a shadow or a tone going on. What we want to do is make sure that the bowl looks like it's deeper and darker in towards the middle and then brighter on the outside. And as I said before, if you haven't got enough dark down there, we can always add more. Okay, so that's a little bit of blue on there. That's my mid sort of blue. I just love these colours, they're so nice. All right. Now, if you don't have a light blue, then like another blue like I've got in the same colour, or family, I should say. See how that's slightly lighter? And because I've kind of mixed it in with the dark here, it's starting to get this purpley kind of tinge. And then we want to move out to the edge where it gets lighter. So I'm just pushing this around with my fingers now. What you want to do is be pulling the dark out from the middle towards the edge, but not all the way to the edge. So see how that very gently creates some depth. So just very lightly pushing that out around the edges like that. And once you've done that, I haven't done it all the way around yet, but once you have done that, then you can get your lighter blue, or if you don't have a lighter blue than the one you're using, then put a bit of white on there. So all we want to do really is brighten or lighten up this edge so that we're creating that depth in the bowl. So something, I'm using white now to show you what I mean. See how that's a much lighter around the edge? And then give your finger a wipe, and I'm just going to pull that in from the edge towards the middle of the bowl now. What that's doing is pulling the lighter tone in towards the darker tones and hopefully creating a bit of a gradient from light to dark. And then I'm going to run around it because the shape of the bowl is round and I want to have that lovely smooth roundness. So this class is a lot about blending. The last class and the one before with the rooster especially, we did lots of loose kind of mark making and not much blending, whereas this is a lot more blending. And you can do, pastels are beautiful because you can do, you know, a combination of things with them. And that's what I love the most, is just being able to vary what you do and how they look, depending on whether you blend or not, and how you're layering and all that kind of thing. So as I'm looking at that, I can squint at that and I can see that it's starting to glow around the edge. And then as it comes in towards the plums underneath, it's getting a bit darker. I do want to darken that up, but I'll be patient and wait. Okay, so now we want to do the same thing around in here. So just come around your bowl. Don't necessarily need to colour where the plums are, but we do need to overlap where they're going to go. because what we want to do is have a continuous background behind them. So see how I'm just pushing this dark around in here. So what I'm doing is overlapping the shapes of the plums. I'm losing all the drawings I did. I warned you, told you that would happen. But we just want to get that nice and dark in there. Lovely and lovely, dark and rich and thick. So then we can build on top of it. So creating a really deep, dark inside the bowl. And that's all going to contribute to making it have depth. All right, so now I'm putting a bit more blue on here because I pushed it in, and now I want it to be a bit thicker. So when you push it in like that, you might feel that it's not enough pastel on the paper because it's not sort of blending together as well as you'd like it to. So if that happens, just add more pastel. Gently blend it in. Okay. And then you can get your white. I will use white just because most people probably wouldn't have those two blues. So I'm just putting a little line around here of the white. I need to continue that there, like that. There'll be a plum there, so I'm not worried about that section. And then I can get my finger and just pull the white in. So just from the very edges, you've got to watch where you put your finger, because otherwise, if you go outside the lines, it'll smudge it a little bit. And then I'm just going to run around it, around the edge like that, to soften that off. Okay, I want to brighten it up a bit more. Sorry, I've got to put this light blue in here. It's just too delicious not to. And then my darker one back in there again. So see how I'm just adding more layers over the top, and that actually gets it nice and thick. So then you've got something to blend. Yeah. And then you can even put more dark down if you feel like you want to add a bit more dark under here, for instance. I'm wiping my fingers off in between each blend just on a little towel. They're not getting clean at all, but it's just kind of getting the surface off my fingers. And then again, just pulling that out, pulling the dark out into the light blue to get that feeling of depth in the bowl. If you look at your picture, you can see how that works. It's sort of darker under the plums, and as you get up to the edges, it gets lighter. So that's kind of starting to get a nice glow around the outside of it now. Okay, so we can continue around the bowl with your light blue or your white, whatever you're using for the light. Smush a bit of that on there, and I come around here and put more on there. I'm pressing pretty hard because I actually want the pastel to stick, and I want to get enough onto the paper that I can pull it around and have enough to do that with. So you can see I've laid it down fairly thick there. This is also a very creamy pastel, so the creamier ones do tend to layer quite nicely and get lovely and rich and thick. Okay, and then my darker blue, so this is slightly darker. It's not much darker. It's just a very slightly darker tone. So that's coming down more towards the center. Like that. And then I'm just going to run my fingers around the edges and sort of merge those two blues together. And then pull it in towards the middle so that it gets darker in the middle. And then kind of merge all the dark that I've got going on in there too. The goal is to kind of push all the pastel into the paper at this stage. As we work towards the surface, we'll be pushing it in less. But when you start off, I like to get a nice base coat pretty much going on so that we get a lovely thickness. It gets lovely and thick and lush. It fills up all that paper. Okay. So you can see, because I'm working flat, there's a lot of dust going on here. So I'm getting a lot of dust sitting on my paper. Now, for some reason, I'm not sure what, but sometimes it just doesn't want to blend in. It just kind of sort of keeps hanging around and getting in the way. And when that happens, you've got to tip it off. Try not to blow it, especially if you're at home, because you'll end up with pastel all over the house. but I will tip some of this off in a moment. It does get kind of annoying because it gets in the way. I'm just popping a bit of white around the edge here just to brighten up that edge. Remember, on this light edge on the left-hand side, it's got a bit more light than on the right. And so I want to make sure that we emphasize that a little bit. So I'm just putting some white around there to lighten up that little edge. The tricky bit will be getting that fine line of dark blue or whatever that colour is around the outside of the bowl, if you're feeling brave. If you're not, you can just leave it undone. It's a nice thing about it, isn't it? You've got options. So I'm just putting some white in where I can see more light happening. So as I'm doing that, see, I've got some colour down here already, and I'm just putting some white over the top and then very lightly pushing it in. So when you press lightly, you can get a much softer kind of finish, and it doesn't sort of merge as much with the colours that are already underneath it. So you tend not to make as much mud when you don't blend very hard. So it's all about adjusting the pressure and just testing what pastels do when you try different things. So you'll find when you press harder, it gets more kind of muddy and grey. And sometimes that's beautiful, that's what you want. But if you want pure bright colours, then you don't want to be blending too much, because then it'll kind of lose its vibrancy. So just running around the edges of your bowl and blending all those beautiful colours in. I feel like I need to get darker down in the middle there. We can work on that. We'll probably need to do it soon, actually, because we've got to put all the plums on top. I'm going to try some of this purple, just for fun. You might like to try a bit of the red, actually. Let's try a bit of both. Oh, that's yummy. So don't be afraid to mix colours around. I just put purple down, and then I put this magenta, purpley red colour over it. And then when you push that in, you start to make all these beautiful dark shadow colours. It's gorgeous. So your purples and reds are glorious for your shadow. And pushing them in like this. Remember I said when you blend hard, push hard, you make a lot of mud. But that's not a bad thing. That's what we want to do at this point if you're making all your shadows. It's to make them nice and rich and dark and warm. And that's one of the other reasons I don't like to use black too much, because even though it is dramatic and creates great contrast, sometimes it's a bit kind of dead, a bit flat in colour. And so using purples and reds just seems to give it more warmth. It's still dark, but just warms things up a little bit. And then as you come out from the middle, just gently, gently merge that in with those blues on the edges there, not all the way to the edge, but just around the middle inside of the bowl. And that will start to create a really nice feeling of the bowl dipping in and getting deep. And remember, when you get to that final layer, to pull it around in the shape of the bowl so that you're creating that lovely smooth round feeling. There we go. I think that's going to work quite nicely. All right. Now, have I got enough white around the edges? Probably for now. So I'm going to tip off some of my dust. Get that out of the way. So now we've got our basic bowl in there. We've got all the background stuff in. And so technically we should be able to then work forward and build all our plums up and pop them inside the bowl and not have to get into the bowl later on to change the colour or anything. So at this point you kind of want to be looking at that and going, okay, does it need to be bluer or brighter or lighter or darker? Do I need to change anything? Is the colour right? Do I need to fix that? So just kind of running through that stuff in your head and assessing how that looks now and whether you're happy with it or not is an important thing to do at each stage. So I'm pretty happy with this. I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit bluer down through here. I'm just going to pop a bit of that on there and see if that brightens it up a little bit, maybe. Yep. You can touch things up like this, you know, before you move on to the next part. And if you want to leave that textured look going on there without blending it in, then, you know, by all means do that. That's what's so nice about the pastels, is you can kind of vary the textures and create your own style. Okay, so I might come back later on and pop a bit more white in around these edges. And when I want to put that trim on the very edge of the plate, I probably want to use a pencil, because you're much more likely to get a finer line with a pencil, and you've got a bit more control. With the pastel sticks, if you're doing fine lines like this, it's a bit harder to sort of see where they're going to land sometimes, because it's such a chunky little stick, and each edge has a different kind of feeling to it. Some are sharper than others, etc. And so it's a little harder to control that fine line. I like the challenge of it, but, you know, if there's a pencil nearby and it's a bit easier, then by all means take that option. Okay, so let's move on to, should we do the outline? I guess we should now. So if you have a pencil handy, grab that. If you want to do the outline, you don't have to. If you only have pastels and you still want to do it, then grab probably a dark blue, it looks like to me. I don't know if I've got a dark blue pencil handy. I'll just have a look. No, not on me. It's still in my workshop bag. All right, so I've just found this blue pastel stick. It's got a reasonably sharp edge on it. Can you see how it's probably been snapped or broken? So it's not blunt at all, and it's got a nice hard edge. I'm not sure what brand this is, probably a Rembrandt. They're usually a bit firmer, and so that should give me a pretty good line, as long as I can see to keep it right on the edge. So as I said, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You could just leave the edge as it is, or leave it till later and grab a pencil and put a line around the edge like that. So you can see there's a lot of dust still sitting on there from my white. So that's sort of getting in the way a little bit. So doing this freehand is also making it a little wonky, but that's okay. It's art. It's not meant to be perfect. And as I said before, it's a bit harder to do with a stick, because you can't, well, I can't anyway, quite see the edge and where it's landing on my paper. Something like that, but I'm not going to get stuck into that too much. So I'm just going to tip off my dust again. Okay. And that will do for now. I can come back in and I can clean that up, tidy it up, maybe find my pencils and do it properly later on. But yeah, technically you could spend a bit more time getting that right. Let's get stuck into these plums. All right, so we've got this little bright red one down in here. Remember that one? So I've kind of lost our pencil marks now because we've smudged everything in. But this is essentially just a bit of bright red in there that kind of goes underneath and gets a little bit darker. So I'm just going to put that in there like that. It's a beautiful red, and just smudge that lightly. So by smudging it, it's starting to create a little bit of tone and form. And then on the right-hand side of that, it's a bit darker, isn't it? So I'm just going to grab this darker purple kind of colour, because it's folding away from us. It's turning away. It's a round thing, so it's got shadow on that right-hand side as it dips back down into the bowl. So I don't know if this is the right purple, but it's probably not quite dark enough actually. Let's put a bit more dark stuff there. And then gently pull it with my fingers that way, so that it's hopefully going to take on some form and look like it's solid, a solid object and not just a flat blob of red sitting there. And then there's another little bit of bright just in there that I can touch up a little bit. So that'll do for that bit. And you can see there's dust sitting around the edges there. I'll tip that off after. Now, having done that, I'm now looking back at my picture and noticing that on this side of this red one, it's much darker in the bowl, down through there. So I want to darken that up a bit more. So these are the things you kind of notice as you go. So we want to darken off in there a bit more because it gets quite dark down in the middle there. And then we've got this little bit of bright plum sitting there. So they're the things that you sort of really need to take notice of as you work your way around plums. So again, it's about tone, isn't it? So this section here of the bowl is much darker than that little plum we can see poking through. So we need to make sure that's lovely and dark. Then it'll make sense. Alrighty, let's do, so we've done that one. That's the furthest one behind. Next we've got, we may as well start up here, top left. And I'm just going to lightly draw the shape of this one back in. So I'm using my ready dark red pastel. And I'm just going to literally fill that in like that with the dark red. That's a good base colour for the plums. Knowing that that middle plum will overlap this one, so we don't need to worry too much about this edge here. Gosh, that's making a lot of dust, that pastel. Very dry and crummy. Okay, so now I'm pushing the pastel into the paper as much as I can. It's not really hanging on very well, because what we want to do is create a base of colour. You can see all that dust? That's all dust there, and it won't rub in. It just doesn't want to stay there. So I've got to tip that off now. Or maybe I can just push it over here and use it for this plum for later. Frustrating when that happens. Okay, so now I've got a nice base for this plum. It's a nice base colour. What we want to do is look at the tones in this. So let's use that as a base colour, but we can use the purple, this dark purple, as some shadow colour. So there's shadow around on the left-hand side of this plum. So I'm just putting a bit of purple in there to create some shadow. And there's also shadow on the left-hand side, right, sorry, cast by the plum next to it. Yeah, lovely. And then we've got the little triangle bit where the stem would have been. So that's that section there. Just putting a shape in there to represent that, pretty much. Cool. Now we've got that blocked in. What I want to do now is get your lighter red or your brighter red, and notice this is the top of the plum, so it's quite bright light there. It's catching the light, and so that side is a brighter red. Put some of that in there like that. Now, if you wanted to, you could technically leave this all quite loose on the paper as it is, or you can blend it all in. So if you like that loose look, then by all means just let it sit there on the top and do its thing. I like to kind of push it around a little bit, because if I push it in, then I know I can put more on top if I feel like it. So I do enjoy pushing colours around and not pressing very hard. So I don't want to blend everything in and make mud out of it, but I do just want to create that lovely range of tone from light to dark to mid. And so the purple with the red is glorious. And then as we go down into the centre area where we already put dark before, then we sort of disappear down in there with the dark, and that red just glows on the top there. If you've only got one red, then maybe just try purple in the darks and your red on the lights. Or if you want to brighten up your red a little bit, I wouldn't put white on there, not to blend in. White's good for the shine, but white isn't a good option if you want to blend it with red, because it just makes kind of a pinky, milky colour. Let's try this blue. I'm dying to try this light blue on here because it's already got a bit of red in it. I just want to put that there. See where the white section is around that little V shape and the seam that goes down through there. This is light blue. It's very light blue. It's like a sky blue. It's kind of nice because it's not white and it's not going to make pink if I push it around a little bit. It gets more purpley, which is a much nicer combination, I think. Yeah, that's better. So the light blue is lovely on there. Now, if I just dab that gently, it kind of starts to give me a bit of a shine on there. And that's what I'm looking for. I want to get a bit of a shine happening. And then I want to darken off in the middle there. So remember down inside this V, I've got, actually I'm going to use blue violet. I left that over there. Use blue violet or a black if that's all you have, just to get that little dark bit happening through there. So we want to start to create a bit of depth. And see how that now looks like it's sinking in, and the little light blue shape around it is giving it some volume and body. Cool, cool. And then see on the seam, on that little seam there, I've just done a broken line through there very lightly. I just used the edge of the pastel to get a really fine broken line. But I want to put a bit of shadow on that. So I'm just going to use the very edge of this very lightly. You might be happier to use a pencil if you have one. See how that's created a little bit of a shadow just along that seam line. So it's a light mark and then a little bit of dark just on the edge to give it the bump, pretty much. So quite happy with how that's turned out so far. And then we just need to add a bit of shine. I'm just looking at that plum in the picture. I can actually see the outline of a person. Must be the photographer. All right, so there's a little shine. I'm just going to use white. Am I? No, I'm going to use very light blue instead of white. That way, if I want to whiten it up even more, I can. So I'm just going to put a little bit of light here for the shine on that one with light blue rather than white. If you don't have a light blue, then by all means use white. Just press lightly and see how it looks. There we go. So that might be just about all we need to do for that one. So it's really quite simple, isn't it, when you break it down into steps. I'm just going to dab those in gently with my finger to soften them off a little bit. And then at the end, if we want to come back and make those light spots brighter, we can. We can use white and we can brighten them right up. But it's really just looking at each plum as you work your way around, figuring out the dark area and the redder or brighter area, and then the light areas, and putting them in where you see them. It's all about tone, isn't it? So this section around here where all the dark is your dark tones, plus in the little V shape there. And then your mid-tone or your beautiful reds are the brighter reds there. And then we're just using your darks to get some shadow and a little bit of light to get some tone in there. So essentially we've just used pretty much, what have we used? We've used purple, red, blue violet, light blue, and lighter blue to create those colours. Oh, and this was that dark red that I had underneath in the first place. So essentially those are the colours we're using on the plums. Okay, and if you just limit yourself to a palette like that and work your way around, then it'll all come together nicely. And we do have other options. We've got still got the pink and the purple if you want to use those. You might prefer more pink in your plums than what I've got, you know, more than red. Anyway, let's move on. So we're going to go down into the bottom left guy here. This is one that's tucked underneath. We can't see the V or the stem area, but it has got a little seam through there, and it's got lovely shadow happening inside here. So I'm going to start with this one again. This is the dark red that I put down before on the base of the plum. So let's just draw in the outline again, remembering this one sits inside the bowl. It's got a little bump on the edge there. So see that little bump there? So it's not perfectly round. It's got like a bit of an apple kind of shape. And then I'm just going to smush some of that colour down on there. This is that very dusty pastel that seems to just be dust and not much else. So your dark red, and then blend that in. So we're blending that in, getting the pastel to stick to the paper. This is the undercoat. We're just building that up now. So I've got lots of dust sitting there. I'm going to have to tip all of that off, which is slightly annoying, but anyway. Take all those pastels off there. So very, very dusty, this one. So you'll find different pastels do different things. Some are dry and dusty. Some are really creamy and lovely and lush. So just different brands feel different, and so do different colours. Okay, so I've still got dust all around the edges there, which is really annoying. And you can see how it's fallen off on the side of my page, and it's kind of hung on to all the texture on the page. Anyway, we'll sort that later. So let's have a look at where the dark sits on this guy. So it's got a really distinct shadow right across the base there. I'm using purple to get my dark in there. The left-hand top left side of it is dark because that's off in shadow as well. So I can put some purple through there. And then down inside, just a little bit on the right, bottom right, it's got some shadow in there as well. So that's some purple. So I'm going to push that around, kind of pull it up into the plum. There we go. See how that started to already create a really nice form because we're putting the dark where the shadow is and then leaving the red or the dark red where it's brightest. And now I'm just going to get my brighter red and put that down here. So just a little bit down through there. It's quite strong, that colour. That's lovely. So same brand of pastel as the crummy red, dark red, but it's not nearly as dusty. Very interesting. So different pigments will also behave differently. Pushing that around, a little bit too bright maybe, but I quite like that. I like that it's nice and bright. So that's giving us a nice bright side of that one. And remember this, I said just before that this has quite a strong shadow. So what we want to do is just sharpen the edge of that shadow up a little bit through here. So just make that a little darker through there and stronger. So shadows are really important. They tell us where things are. They give us context. Okay. Push that around and that will become a little shadow through there. And remember I said there's a seam down through this guy, kind of just down through there like that. So I just drew a line with my dark purple through there, and I'm just going to pull that around gently. Just pull it in the shape of the plum so that we're creating a little seam through there. And the other thing we need to do then is just add this pale blue. See on the left-hand side of the seam, there's a slight shine just there. Just press really light. And then with your finger, just pull it through lightly like that. And hopefully that'll start to create a nice little bump. And if not, come back with a bit more dark, or even your blue violet if you want something a little bit darker. And then gently pull it around again. And if you muck it up like that, just pop a bit more of your light blue through there. So just want soft, gentle lines for these bits. So we just want a little bit of shine on there, not a lot. We don't want that to be super bright or glowing too much. And then see on the top section here, just on that shoulder of the plum, just there, where I've just put some very light blue. That's this light blue. It's kind of a grey light. So I'm just going to put a bit of blue on there and gently push that through. So that becomes like a purpley violet colour. It just, again, helps to create the tone and texture of this lovely little plum. Okay, and then for the light, so we can pop a bit of light here. This is my pale blue. If you don't have that, just use a white, but don't press too hard. So there's a little shine there, and there's another one there. And you can soften them off with your fingers if you just dab it in gently. So it's not too bright, knowing we can come back afterwards and add more bright if we need to. So that's pretty much that one done. So let's see if I can tip off any more of this dust, because it's a little bit annoying. See how it's sitting all around there? I'm going to have to put a bit more on, see if that'll stick. I want that to come closer to the edge of the bowl. Just doesn't seem to want to stick to the paper. Push that in gently. When you do this kind of thing, then you might have to kind of redo, the other detail, depending on whether you've smudged it all and lost it or not. Sometimes you can a little bit. Just I'm just noticing on the left-hand side of that plum, it's a little darker. A bit more shadow in there with my blue, violet, purple. Again, just to create the turn in the plum. Cool. And then it's got a few little stripy kind of darker lines here and there. So you just suggest some of those very gently with some pastel and then push it in a little bit so it's not too obvious. Okay, let's see if I can get this dust off again. Messed up the edges of that one. When you mess up an edge like that, best thing to try and do is get your kneadable eraser and shape it into a sharp edge and just dab, don't rub. If you rub, it'll blend it in. See how dabbing has picked up some of that dust off there. And the blue's coming back from underneath. So because we pushed the blue in earlier, what it's done is hang on to the paper, and then as I dab, and I have to keep finding another clean side to my eraser, see how it picks up the pastel off the paper, and then I just knead it. Find another side that doesn't have pigment on it. And so you can literally just run around your paper and do that and pick up all that excess dust. So you can see where the dust has kind of landed on there and hung on to the texture of the paper. Just kind of push that around a little bit and soften off the edges. Okay, cool. Now we're going to move around and do this guy, this one here on the right. Again, I'm going to put this darker red down underneath. So same process. We'll do the same process with each one. Just noticing on each one where the lights and the darks are. And of course that all depends on the direction of the light and the order of the plums and where they sit in relation to each other. So this one needs to come up above my halfway line. So it's reasonably big, this one, and it overlaps that little bright one that we did at the beginning. And then it comes down, it's fairly big, all the way down through here. And it just sits on the very edge of the plate. So it touches the brim of the plate and comes down through there. So that's pretty much the shape of that guy. I am going to tip this dust off before I go much further. and blending this in with my fingers. So I just want to make it stick to the paper. Like so. So dark red first. It's already got some nice shadow and tone happening because we've already got that lovely dark down in here. There we go. So I've already got that lovely purple happening down through here, but I want to put a bit more in there. So I'm just going to darken that off a bit more with my blue violet. So to make that little bright red plum on the very bottom pop a bit more, we can put more dark on this one right next to it. So see how that brings that bright red out when you've got that darker tone next to it. I'm pulling that out a little bit like that. So pulling it out from the middle towards the right-hand side. Okay. And then I want to pop a bit of my bright red in here because I love this colour. As I said, if you don't love red or if you don't have red, then try a pink. And again, I'm going to push that around through there. That's where I can see the brighter red anyway. And so this one also we can't see where the stem comes from. It hasn't got that little section showing. So we can not worry about that. Tip off my dust again. This is why if you work on an easel that you have on an angle, it's much easier because the dust just drops, usually just drops off your page and it doesn't get in the way like it is at the moment. So I think I've made that one really big, but never mind. It's okay. And now I'm going to put some light in there with my light blue. So that's this little one. Remember, we haven't used white yet. So I can see there's like a shape like that. Now that must be reflecting the other plum that's there next to it. And then there's a lighter smudge like this. And that one there. And then it's kind of a blue tinge around the side of it too. So like I said earlier, it's reflecting the colour of the bowl onto the plums. And I meant to pick up this lightest blue. I don't know if that's my lightest blue or white. No, it is blue. Hard to tell sometimes. And just putting my light in there with that one. And I can come back later on and brighten that up if I want to. Dabbing it in gently, tipping off more dust. So much dust today. Now I'm just going to define this little edge here. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little reflection of the next plum in there. And so I just want to make sure that's sitting there like that. Sometimes you think, why is that there? It doesn't make sense. But if it makes sense because it's logical. So even if it doesn't seem to make sense, you've got to put these shapes and tones and things in to get the overall finished effect. There we go. So that's that guy. And notice too, just on this side here, I've just picked up my blue that I used on the bowl. It's quite blue through there. Can you see how that's reflecting the bowl in the same blue? Just in there. So you can pop a bit of that in there too, which just makes it a little bit more interesting and dusty. Tip off the dust. Okay. So I think I've made him a bit too chunky, but never mind. All right, so we've done those three, and then we need to do the other three that sit kind of on top of those guys. So they're going to get a bit bigger now. All right, so let's start. We might go to this top one on the right here. It's quite dark, this guy. And again, we just want to draw in the edge of it. So he sort of overlaps the one on the left, but it doesn't quite touch the one on the right because we've got that little bright one underneath. So drawing in the basic shape of that one, that basic circular shape, and then it kind of disappears down here into the dark. So that's nice. And I'm going to rub that in to try and keep all my dust on the paper. I'm really not enjoying this pastel at all, this particular colour. It's quite crummy. Okay, so you want to try and make sure that you leave the glow of the one underneath, that bright one, sitting there. If you've lost it, pop it back in now so that we can work around it. Okay, so I've got lots of dust sitting on there, so I'm going to tip that off. There we go. So that's a good base. So just checking the shape and you know, how far out from the side of the bowl that it comes. Where does it overlap this little guy on the left? And it does, so I need to make that a bit wider. And then noticing the shape of that as well. So just pushing that around a little bit there. Noticing where the little stem comes from. So we've got that shape there. It's like a little teardrop shape. And then it comes around in the crease on the side there. So what I'm doing is just putting a little dark line through there with my tiny piece of blue violet pastel. So this is what happens when you use, you know, your pastels a lot. You end up with these tiny little crumbs, and if it's your favorite color or something you love, you try really hard not to lose it. But it gets harder and harder to work with those tiny pieces. I'm just pushing in some shadow on the left hand side there to darken that off again, because we want to make that nice and dark as it sinks down into the bowl. And then I'm going to softly push this in as well. So I've got that little dark section in there. And remember, now we need to be looking at the light or the bright. So on the left hand side of this guy, he's reflecting the plum next door. So can you see there's a little bit of bright red in there that's reflecting that guy there? So pop a bit of your bright red in there and then just gently push it in. So that looks like it belongs there. Cool. Where else is it bright? It's not really. This one's quite dark. So I'm going to go to my purple and put some dark. This is the darkest purple, not blue violet. It's not quite as dark as that. If you don't have a dark purple, then maybe a dark blue would be lovely through there. So see how that's got sort of darker tones, just marks and lines, and that very outline of it, or the edge of it, is dark. And then we can pop in some of the light bits. So I've put my dark purple in where I can see those little dark shapes that are on this guy. Does that show up on the black and white? Yeah, it does. If you look at your black and white version, you can see where it's dark. And so what I'm doing is putting this colour where I can see the blackest kind of tones on this plum. So there's dark down here on this side too. So the light's hitting the top of it. So as I said before, you can leave your mark loose like this, or you can push it all in and blend it around and create beautiful tones and so forth. So that's looking okay. Just put my picture back, tip off my dust again. And then all we need to do is add our blue for some light. So there's quite a lot of light on this guy. You can see there's a little shimmer of light across that section there. Then we have a nice big bright light there. I'm just going to press a bit harder with my light blue, and I can come back over with my lighter blue afterwards. And also we've got this lovely light blue kind of haze that comes across the seam there and then down through the middle around that little dark section like that. I'll smudge that in a minute so it won't look as bright. And then we've also got this lovely light bit around here. And then it's got a little shine just on the edge there. And over here on the right, there's a little shine back there too. Just noticing all those little bits of light. Now I've done all that with a light blue. And as I said, I can brighten it up when I need to. I'm just going to dab it in gently. Don't want to blend it because then we'll make sort of milky colours and we'll lose the brightness of the reds. But if you just dab it with your finger to soften it off a little tiny bit, then it will just sort of merge in nicely without making too much red mud. And if you do lose some of your red, you can just pop a bit more over it. So don't, think that just because we've used this colour underneath, we can't put it back in. We absolutely can, and that's what's so beautiful about pastels, is you can keep adding colour in layers and kind of softening off the edges a little bit. So that's starting to get some form going on now. I just want to darken off down in through here a bit more in the middle section. That's better. And then I might darken off in the middle there where the stem is, and then where that stem is it's like a little light bit. What am I going to use for that? I'll try this purple. Just want a little bit of light like that, just to try and create a little bit of stem in there. It's probably not the right colour. Put a bit of pink or red over that. Soften it off. See how that just suggests that there's a little stump in there. And then if you want to go brighter, not with white yet, if you don't need to, but then you can really brighten up that, one bit of shine that's just there. And that just makes that pop a little bit more, doesn't it? And a couple of really shiny bits on there. So that one looks all right. That'll do for now. That'll do. All right. Before I do move on though, I just want to pop a little shadow on the seam. So the little seam we've got on the side here. Just get a pencil if you have one, or at the edge of your dark pastel, just to get a bit of shadow happening in there so we can see the fold. I might put a bit more light, just very gently. Sometimes you don't want to press too hard to make things too bright, but you can always dab it in a little bit. There we go. So that's that one done. Lovely. Let's move over to the left-hand side. So we'll do this one over here at about 10 o'clock. And same process. This one's a lot redder and it's quite lovely. So I'm still going to use my dark red to get the shape in. So just to draw in the shape. This one oozes out over the edge of the plate. These final three all do that. So I'm just going to get some colour down on there. Like that. Push it in as much as I can. So this one we can actually see all sides of this guy. It's sort of sitting on top of the others, so it's not hiding behind anything. So we can see all the edges. Tip off my dust. Lovely. So that's a good base. And then I can get this gorgeous bright red, because there's a lot of lovely bright in this one. And smoosh that over there. Like that. Now, if you go too bright, you can always quieten it down afterwards. Okay. It is much darker underneath, down on this side, on the bottom left. So I can put a bit of purple in there to create some shadow. So that it has that lovely form going on. I love purple and red, they're glorious together. Okay. Something like that. And then just sharpen up the edge with my purple there. And then we've got our little dip in the middle here. I'll just put that in with a bit of purple for now. And gently push all of this in. So just gently pushing this in to get it to stick to the paper. So as you do that, you're blending the colours that are already underneath and the colours on top. So it's starting to get some nice form going on. Like that. Lovely. So tip off some dust again. This one's gone all a bit wonky actually. It's not quite round enough. It's quite huge too. I'll round that off a little bit more at the top there. So it pays to check your shapes as you go. Tip off my dust. And then we'll add some pale blue for light. So again, there's a little bit of blue over here on the edge. Can you see there's a little shine just there, top edge? So that's probably reflection from the plate. So I can put some of that colour there too. And then pop a bit of light here. So there's a light blue there. And then we've got that lovely little teardrop shape around here. And I'll soften all this off again. A little bit of blue in there. A shine there and a shine there. Okay, and then where we've got the stem section, we need to make that a little bit darker inside and then just pop a fine line around the seam or the little bump in the plum as it comes down through there and from the centre. And then I might just pop a little bit more blue violet down around where I can see some shadow. Actually, there's some light in here too. There's a little bit of light just through there, reflection. And then down in the centre, so you can see the outline of this one all the way around, but it is a little darker just through here. It's getting some shadow. And then just gently pushing your colour in, so dabbing it lightly with your finger. Gently like that. And you can soften some of that off. If you feel like your brights are too strong or too defined, just give them a little dab and blur them off a little bit. So this guy probably needs to be a tad darker, maybe on this side. It seems to be getting bigger by the minute, but never mind. A bit darker in here. So again, it's just looking at your tones and noticing, whether it's bright or dark or what's going on. It's a little bit too egg-shaped. That's coming together okay. And gently pushing that in. I'll have to tip off more dust again. And then we can add a little bit of light onto that one. So again, just using my lightest blue. Put a bit of shine through here. And a bit there. And there's a bit there. Lovely. Okay, and as I said earlier, if you need to clean up those edges, for instance around here, it's kind of all not tipped off as nicely as I'd like it to, then you can just dab your eraser and pick it up as you go. It takes a little while, so you've got to be a bit patient when it comes to cleaning up the edges. But I won't get into that just yet because we've got 2 more plums to do and we're running out of time. All right, let's do this bottom one. So you can see it's quite dark in towards the center. And then it gets brighter on the top where the light's catching it. So same thing, just mark this one in and it comes all the way out to the edge of the plate. All the way out to there, so all the way to the edge of your page pretty much. Like that. And then I can push that in. So can you see the grid line that I put in before with the light that's showing through? So sometimes it's better to take that out before you start applying the colour. So just tipping off the dust in a second. So this one's also got quite defined edges. Even though it's darker down towards the middle, it's still got a definite edge on it. Okay, so tip that one off. And again, I've got dust all sitting there on the paper. Okay. And then I'm just going to put a bit of dark across here. And there's a little bit there where the stem sits. You can hardly see it, it's right on the edge. But what you want to do is mark in that dark section like that. And then we've got shadow down on this side here, just on the underneath bit. So a bit of dark down through there. Cool, cool. They're looking a bit appley-ish, aren't they? Oh well. And then a bit of red, bright red, beautiful bright red, right on the top there. Oh, that's yum. Yummy, yummy. And you can see I'm kind of pulling it in the shape of the plum or apple, whatever this is. No, they're plums. And then pulling it around. So what I'm trying to do on this one is to get that red to sort of sit on top of the darker red and create that lovely kind of pattern in the skin of the plum. Oh, it's gorgeous. I love that colour. Okay, and then just touching up again around that area there where there's that dip or the shadow through there. And then we've got the pale blue again. Is that my palest blue? No, this is my next, not quite light blue. So a little bit of that just on the edge there. Can you see there's a bit of blue on the shoulder there? And I've got a glimpse of it down through there. And a little smidge of it. Okay, so shine on here. And then we can put the brightest glow just there. That's lovely. This is still light blue, not white blue. And there's a little tiny shine up there where the stem is. And there's also a little stem there. Now I didn't pick out any browns or anything for the stems. Kind of didn't see that so much, but I'll just try purple. And push that in a little bit. What will make brown? Red and, don't know. Make that a bit dark there. There we go. So that's kind of indicating the little stem on that plum. And so it's also a little darker on the left side there. I might just darken that off a little bit with my purple. Again, just to indicate where the light's coming from. Okay, so our bowl of plums is nearly there. And we've just got to finish off with this final one. Bang in the middle. Beautiful. So this one sits in front of all the others, or on top of. So I'm going to, again, use my dark red to mark that in. Still making lots of dust. That hasn't improved at all. See, it's terrible. It's all sitting here on the top, and if I push it around, it just doesn't go anywhere, which is quite annoying. But anyway, so I'm just pushing that around. I'm sort of staining the paper with it, but it's not really hanging on very well. Okay. Good. And I'll tip that off. So you can see it's all kind of caught on the side of my page here. I'm going to have to tidy all of that up later. Okay, so the left-hand side of this one is darker because the light is on the right. So if you look at the shine on this guy, you can see most of the shine's on the right-hand side. And then we've got shadow down in the middle bit there as well. So if I'm just going to push some purple into that left side to get some form happening and a bit of shadow. And then I'm going to get some of this bright red. So there's a few little patches of bright red on here. I just love bright red, so I can't help myself. But whatever you've got, you know, if it's pink or orange even would be fun. Okay. So getting some nice bright red on there and pushing that in nicely too, so it's kind of blending with the colour underneath. I'm not pushing too hard. If you push hard, you just make mud and it gets all dark. And then I did put a little bit of purple in the middle there just to create my little dip. So if I smudge that in a little bit and kind of pull it from the middle out towards the outside of the plum, then it starts to look like it's dipping in a bit with the shadow. Cool. Then we've got to just darken off the middle of that. So it's a funny little teardrop sort of shape, and then it's got the crease coming across like there. Like a tadpole sort of shape, isn't it? With a little crease coming across. I'm just going to dab that gently and then push that in. And then I want to get my light blue again. So this is where we're going to come around the middle section here with this little bit of light blue. It's almost like a purpley tinge, isn't it? Through there. And then there's also a little bit of light through here. And a little bit of light down there and here. And around the sides. So just trying to get some shine on there. Dabbing that in gently, gently. Just soften it off. Lovely. All right. And so that's nearly coming to life. A little bit of shine over there. Just soften that off a little bit too. And I'm going to put my pale blue on here and put the light in. So those little bright bits through there. One there. See how that just changes it? It just brings it to life. And then we've got the stem in the middle too. And again, I haven't picked up a brown or orange or whatever that colour is. And I'll try this pencil, which is a yellow colour. Just happens to be here. So use that to get a bit of a stem going on. Just a little shape. It's just a little knobby bit on the top and then a little kind of stem. May as well put it in over on this other one while I'm there. And I want to darken off just around underneath that to create some shadow, give it a little bit of form. That does look like an apple. But anyway, it's all good. So there you have it. It's pretty much a bowl of plums ready to eat. This one here needs some cleaning up. The edges got a bit crazy, got away from me a bit there. And I would probably go find another dark red that's not so crummy to tidy that up a little bit and remove some of the dust. Just using my blue violet to try and sharpen up the edge of that. So yeah, I need to get rid of some of that with the eraser. But essentially, that's our bowl of plums pretty much done. And I would love to see your photos. So when you're finished, please take a photo of what you've done and send it through to me, because then I can pop that into the newsletter next week. And thank you for coming. And if you'd like to do some more videos, you'll find loads of them on my website. And I hope you enjoy them. And I do appreciate any feedback as well.
Thanks, Jeannie. And good luck
Jenny,
in
that's
Toowoomba.
been